What's up everybody, and welcome back to the channel and to another Outriders video. Now this is the fourth one in my series of debuff character videos. Originally I set out wanting to build at least one version of each for each one of the different characters, and so far of course we've looked at Devastator, Trickster, as well as Pyromancer. So that left us with Technomancer, and Technomancer was a funny one for me, just simply due to the fact that as much as I wanted to build a debuff character, I actually ended up building a character that is exceptionally good at crowd control and essentially locking down enemies, but not really putting any debuffs on them per se, except for this, CC. But let's have a look at the build, and if you do find it useful or enjoy the video in any way, please do consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, maybe sharing the video with a buddy. It really does help the channel grow, and it just means a whole lot to me. But without any further ado, let's go. As mentioned, starting out, the realization was that we would want to be incorporating Fixing Wave into this build, just because it is such a versatile ability that the Technomancer has, and it allows you really to shore up and defend your teammates very well. But the realization is that the Fixing Wave ability itself doesn't really feature any ways to specifically affect the enemies. As I've said, it's mostly about buffing your character, your own team, increasing their resistances, increasing their armor, giving them life, reloading their clips, all of that. So looking further out past that, then what would we use to essentially debuff the enemies? What would be unique to the character's identity? And more specifically, what legendary set could we lean into for this? Now, of course, the Technomancer's status effect is toxic, but also freeze. Freeze is something that the melee for the Technomancer does, and a lot of the skills tend to be sort of focused around that, things like cryo turret, for instance. And so it started making more and more sense to think about using the Borealis set, because that would allow us to deal more damage to things that are frozen, but it will also allow us to pivot more into like the frozen side of the Technomancer, with perhaps some enhancements to cryo turret and some of the other skills there. Now, one thing that's always something that I look at as well is my objective here is not to build a character that only works in co-op, or to build a character that's really good by solo but doesn't really offer the same tangible benefits in a co-op scenario. So really the idea is a kind of like a hybrid character that is able to do CT15s, whether it might be substantially slower than a character that's purely geared for finishing fast. Yes, that's absolutely true. But on the other hand, I do want to make something that offers a lot of utility in the co-op sphere and is able to assist teammates, and that's definitely what we have here, through a combination of, as I've said, frozen effects. That being said, I think Technomancer probably impressed me the least when it comes to this sort of debuff playstyle. I just don't think that it offers the same great sort of debuff opportunities that are present on something like a Devastator with Leap, or a Trickster with Time Rift and essentially locking stuff down with dots, or a Pyromancer with Branded. Now, does that mean that you could not make an effective Technomancer that fits into this playstyle? No, I think in fact this build here is quite good at locking down enemies, and essentially an enemy that's frozen is not casting any abilities, is not doing any damage, and so therefore the CC is just as useful as the debuffs. But you are definitely going to see significantly slower finish times and expedition times using a Technomancer as your debuffer in the group, rather than using something like the Devastator or the Pyromancer. So when it comes to the actual build, let's look at skills first. We're using cryo turret, Fixing Wave, and cold snap here. Of course, the idea is we want to use as many gadgets as possible, because we're also going to go down the gadget tree. And so cryo turret works obviously because it applies freeze to enemies. It's a great way to also pull aggro if you keep the turrets between you and the enemies. And we're also going to create a situation where we can have two of these turrets out at once. Now, it is on a fairly long cooldown of 17 seconds, but the point is you can always have these turrets up, because when you throw the second one out and your cooldown starts, your turrets will still be up and shooting by the time the cooldown finishes. Now, Fixing Wave and Cold Snap, both of them are on fairly substantial cooldowns, Fixing Wave being 18.5 and Cold Snap being 15.8. And you do have to apply some discipline when using these. So obviously you don't use them as soon as they come off cooldown, but they're very situational. You're using fixing wave when your allies are in trouble, or you yourself are in trouble, essentially an oh shit button. And you use cold snap to manipulate combat in a way that if a bunch of enemies are huddled together, and you can, you know, sort of benefit from the icicle storm effect, or just again kind of like an oh shit moment. But through tactical use of these two abilities, the cooldown is not that big an issue, because when you use a fixing wave, if you know what you're doing, or if you've done it at the right time, I suppose is the right way of saying it, then you won't need another one for another 18.5 seconds unless something drastically goes wrong. And the same is kind of true for cold snap. Again, you're freezing everything with cold snap, but you have so much status power on this build that the freeze really lasts very long. So for almost half of the cooldown, in fact, if not a little bit longer, you actually have enemies frozen down completely, and in that time you can kill them. So whatever that survives after that's done, you know, you can just apply a frozen effect again if you need to. Now when we go over to the weapons, I use absolute zero on here because it has status power on it, which we're trying to stack as much as possible because we want those long freezes. But it has ultimate freezing bullets as well, which freeze enemies every 1 second that you shoot them, which is really powerful. And then I use strings of Gauss on here, which allows you to deal this AoE damage on everything that you shoot at around you. And it's also on a super low cooldown of 2 seconds. Now something weird happens, and I don't know if it's a visual bug, I don't know if it's just something that I'm imagining, but something weird happens when you use strings of Gauss on frozen enemies. And oftentimes, and I'm sure maybe you noticed that in the footage that was playing before, you'll notice that strings of Gauss essentially never stops. It's constantly running, so it doesn't even have this 2 second cooldown. But once the lightning starts coursing through the enemies, it keeps running through them until most of them are dead. So again, I said this could be a visual bug, but it definitely feels that when you attack groups with this build, you're dealing a hell of a lot of damage. And that's really one other point that I want to discuss, and that is that your damage profile with this build is very much geared towards killing groups of enemies rather than one single target. You're at your weakest when you fight one single target, because you don't benefit from things like strings of Gauss and basically, you know, like any other, you know, AoE abilities that you can lever off of cold snap, like icicle storm, for instance. So that's why it's important that we do have ultimate freezing bullets, because let's say you're fighting and the last thing that's left on the battlefield is a brood mother, you've killed everything else around it. The ultimate freezing bullets is going to let you, I mean, she'll resist some of it, but it'll let you a lot of the times freeze and basically in the time that the enemy is frozen, it can't deal any damage to you, and you have time to get your other abilities off cooldown, throw out some more turrets, and essentially just stay alive. Now this does feature an Anemoy and a Torment in Agony as well, and this is of course the Moaning Winds meta, if I can call it that way, which is another option for you here. The reason why I have it set up this way is basically for when you play this character solo. When you're playing this in co-op, you will never have a situation, well, not never say never, but you'll very seldomly have a situation where you'll be in melee range having to swap Moaning Winds and kill stuff, because you're going to be freezing everything and your teammates are going to be able to capitalize on that and deal as much as possible damage to them. However, when you play this build solo, you will sometimes find that, again, like in the scenario that I painted just now, fighting one last big enemy, that you'll just want to, you know, deal more damage to them, and then it's good to lean into something like Moaning Winds. So entirely optional, you don't have to use it at all. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the footage that you saw earlier didn't actually show me reloading into Moaning Winds, and it was basically just me using the turret, me using frozen damage, and me using the strings of Gauss interaction. Now we are using 3 pieces Borealis, so we're using the head, the chest, and the legs, and that's because those 3 pieces all have firepower on them, but they also have the other 2 substats that we're looking for. So we do want long range damage, because we are going to be fighting at a distance with this build, and so any additional, you know, damage that we can give our weapon there is helpful. And we are also using status power on here. Now you could stack cooldown reduction on all 5 of your pieces, and that would substantially affect your fixing wave cooldown, and it would affect your cold snap cooldown. But I find that for me, status power works better here, because status power, as mentioned, makes your freezes last longer. And since we're trying to build a situation here where we want the build to essentially be like a debuff or a buff class to our allies, I feel that the utility that we get with these long freezes outweighs us having faster cooldowns, because the freezes overall get applied by the turrets, they get applied by you, and so it just benefits the overall CC profile of the build better. Now here we use Twins and Shatter on in terms of mods. Twins gives us 2 cryo turrets instead of 1, which is fantastic. And then Shatter lets us deal more damage to enemies that are frozen. Now, I build this so that you can play it solo and in co-op. If you only ever plan to build or to run this in a co-op situation, then you could swap things like Shatter and the additional freezing damage out, because you're not the main damage dealer, so it doesn't matter. So you can add even more utility in, maybe augment Fixing Wave even more or Cold Snap even more. But because we want to be able to sometimes run this in solo as well, this does give us a bit more damage profile for us ourselves, so that we can deal more damage to enemies. Now on the chest piece, we have Icicle Storm and Frostbite. Icicle Storm is what allows Cold Snap to freeze stuff, and then when you pop one of them, it basically deals a whole lot of damage, 252k to be exact, to everything around it. And that's why you can often have a situation where you Cold Snap a bunch of stuff, you hit something on the side, and you cause this chain reaction that just kills everything. The Technomancer is quite known for this, and it's a great effect, so it would be silly of us to not utilize it. Frostbite says that when enemies are frozen by Cold Snap, their armor is also reduced by 100%. So this is an actual debuff that we do have on the Cold Snap side. When we go over to the pants, we have Cold Purification. This is great. This says that every time when you activate Cold Snap, you and your allies that are covered by the Cold Snap, they have negative statuses removed from them, and they actually have status immunity for 5 seconds. I'd like this ideally to be a little bit longer. I find all of these buffs that you get from Cold Snap and from Fixing Wave only last for 5 seconds. I think 8 seconds would make a little bit more sense, but this is what we have right now. And so this is pretty cool. If you're fighting a bunch of Perforo and your teammates all have bleed on them, you can activate this. It takes bleed off you and your allies, and it makes you immune to bleed for 5 seconds, or to all status elements for that matter. So you can also not be frozen or set on fire or anything like that. Freezing boost is exactly the same as what we have up here with Shatter, so it just allows us to deal more damage against frozen stuff. You can swap this out if like I said, if you only ever plan to play this in co-op, because the point is then you will have teammates that'll be dealing the majority of the damage while you're like basically the guy that's doing the crowd control. On the gloves, we have Cold Snap, Long Winter, and Long Winter makes Cold Snap's radius much bigger. In fact, it almost covers the entire battlefield. That is a fantastic upgrade to this. By default, Cold Snap doesn't reach that far, and this just makes it, a lot more versatile. We do have Hail Shot on here as well, and that's a mod for cryo turret that makes your turrets do more damage based off a scaling value of how much status power you have. All of our pieces have status power on, so this just makes each one of those little shots from a cryo turret also deal more damage. And you'd be surprised when you put 2 of these turrets down and you see them start ripping into enemies how much damage they actually deal. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's actually pretty impressive. Then when we get over to the boots, we have Mr. Fix-It on here, and this says that when you activate Fixing Wave, you're gonna, by default, Fixing Wave, you're gonna heal your allies. But then you're also gonna give them 100% additional armor, and you're gonna give them 30% damage resistance. Now, that is for 5 seconds. Again, like I said, like the previous one, it would be cooler for me if this was 8 seconds. It would make it a hell of a lot better for that matter. But 5 seconds is what we got, and that's basically the increase that we see there. Then we also have Damage Absorber on here. This just increases your own armor and resistance by 10%. It's always active, and it's just a great way for you to always just, take less damage and also stay alive. Again, this is way more important for when you're playing solo than when you're playing in co-op. In co-op, you won't often be the person that gets the aggro or gets attacked, because you'll kind of like be in the back. So this can also be swapped out if you only ever plan on playing co-op. And when we get over to the class tree, we are going middle because we want to be benefiting from our gadget skills as much as possible, and that's what Tech Shaman is all about. So we do pick up Winter's Barrier, which gives us a 3-second class melee damage mitigation oh shit button. And so you don't actually have to hit something, you just have to press melee. So if you're running and you see you're about to take a big hit from something like that, you can just melee, and that gives you 40% additional damage mitigation for 3 seconds. We do pick up a Wipeout, which makes us deal 20% more damage to anything that's below 30% life. We do pick up Exposing Frost. This is fantastic. You will be freezing everything, and the minute you freeze something, you're also going to apply Vulnerable. And when you pick up its sister node, Mark for Execution, it also increases the effectivity of that Vulnerable by another 40%, which is huge. We do get Medical Unit. This overall increases the healing received by you and your allies by 30%, and this procs every time you use a gadget. All 3 of your skills are considered gadget skills, so you will have 100% uptime with this. Now this means that you are increasing the healing efficiency for your teammates. So that means that their own healing is 30% more effective. So if they are healing off of skills life leech or all damage done like a Technomancer, that healing is going to be 30% better. This also means that when you hit him with a fixing wave, that fixing wave is going to be 30% better. We do get Doctor of Medicine here, increases all healing by 20% for you and your allies. So when you proc this effect, these two combined actually increase the healing effectiveness by 50%. And that's why this class is so unique, because while you aren't really debuffing enemies, you are really increasing the survivability of your party. And that's where this is a little bit different. That's where Technomancer has its own little flavor when it comes to the debuff, archetype. Last but not least, we get Overclocked. Overclocked has two effects. It essentially also has a effect like the Pyromancer, which is Phoenix, which means you can come back to life if you get dropped. This can happen once every 180 seconds, and I haven't actually died with this build yet, but you have this sort of like, coming back to life situation. This is great if the whole team gets wiped, you actually come back and you can survive longer. Now, this also has the effect of that every time when you use a gadget, your anomaly power and weapon damage is increased by 40%. Again, you have 3 gadget abilities, so you're always going to have this benefit and this additional damage. Now that's it for the build, guys. Let me know in the comments down below if you've experimented with this or if you've built something similar to this, what changes you made, what mods you used, and how you play this class, and whether it's something that you enjoy and you feel that it offers a lot of utility to your team, or whether you prefer one of the other classes. I want to thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far, but it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, a great afternoon, and a super awesome evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.